have you been struggling with problems that you're facing lately? Perhaps you're feeling overwhelmed by your problems, that the problems you're confronted with are going to bury you alive. And perhaps you're crying out to God about, why is it you seem to have so much problems? What can I do about these things? Welcome to my leadership podcast on wilsonliling.com. Our podcast is designed for the areas of intercession, prophetic, and of course, leadership. Today, our topic is this: don't let your problems become a problem. So, are you having a lot of problems? Well, I have a news flash for you. To do God's will always mean facing problems. The bigger the vision that God gives us, the bigger the problems we have to face. In fact, the greater the dream, it's sometimes seen like the greater the nightmares too. Is there anything that we can do about this? Well, godly, successful leaders, they realize this. Good leaders are those whose faith in God is that God will somehow lead us through the problems. For they know that no problem is impossible for God to deal with. The real issue is whether we will be the vessels through whom God will use to solve the problems. And that is why the best leaders, the best staff, they don't run away from the problems. They learn how to confront it. Why? Because they realize a few things. Firstly, ignoring a problem usually means the problems will fester and it becomes a bigger problem. Secondly, when we run away, when we ignore, or when we neglect the problems, it almost always becomes someone else's problems. And the most valuable leaders and staff are those who learn how to solve problems. So will we be problem avoiders or problem solvers? So let me now ask you this question. Will the real problem please stand up? In order to solve the problems that we are confronted with, we must first identify the root of the problems. Pogo, a cartoon character created by Walt Kelly, had this insightful observation. He said this: "We have met the enemy, and they are us." Whoa. You see, the huge problems that we may be confronted with is not the biggest problem. The biggest and possibly most stubborn problem lies in our own hearts. Dr. Phil Pringle, founder of the C3 Church movement, also had this observation. The problem is never the problem. The real problem is our attitude towards it. Whoa. You see, when we have the wrong attitude, problems become insurmountable. But when we have the right attitude, problems become obstacles to climb over. So what kind of leader do we want to be? The one that is buried by the problems, or the one that climbs on top of the problems? So let us now look at some attitudes. Attitudes needed to crack our problems. So what attitudes should we have in facing the problems? Firstly, number one, don't fear problems. We can have a fearful mentality towards problems, and such fears will blind us. It holds our emotions captive, and we are unable to see beyond the problem. The problem becomes magnified. Do you remember the 10 Israelite spies that returned from spying the promised land? They came back with terrible reports about giants in the land. Numbers chapter 13, verse 32 to 33 has this to say: "And they spread amongst the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, 'The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there,'" which is the descendants of Anak, came from the Nephilim. "We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them." So their fear magnified the people of Canaan into giants. Their fear caused them to resist the very will of God. Their fear resulted in 40 years of wandering in the wilderness because of God's judgment. And years later, When they did enter the land, lo and behold, the people there were of the same stature as the Israelites. On the other hand, to Joshua and Caleb, who also were those spies that went out to the promised land, they trusted God fully, and the so-called giants became grasshoppers to them. You see, it was all an issue of perspective. Sure, there were challenges to conquer the promised land, but they were not giant problems. So our perspective should be this: problems can be solved, especially by the grace of God. When we are on God's side, who else can win against us? Consider the case of David, the young shepherd boy. King Saul and his army were paralyzed with fear because of Goliath, the giant. They were so focused on their fear of the problem, they could not find a way out. But David came along and viewed the problem totally differently. He had a clearer perception of the problem and found a unique solution by the grace of God. David was able to see by faith that the giant was simply too big to miss. God was able to use David to secure a victory that he could not with others who were being paralyzed by fear. So think about this. Is our fear hindering us from finding the solution? Even God's solution? The second thing I want to mention is that problems are opportunities in disguise. You know, sometimes opportunities are so well disguised, they look like problems. If only problems came with little tags that read, "This is a size 10 problem," but can be reconfigured to a size 20 opportunity. Let me tell you a story. Many years ago, a big shoe company sent a salesman to a little African nation. On arrival, the man was shocked to discover the natives did not wear shoes. So he wrote back to the company to inform them it was useless because nobody had need of shoes. So he returned, defeated. Sometime later, another salesman came into this same country, and again he was confronted with a similar situation. Immediately he telegraphed back to his company, "Send me every shoe in stock. Everybody here needs shoes." You see, the first salesman only saw the problem. The second salesman saw the problem as an opportunity. So consider this. Problems are actually looking for solvers, and the solvers are often rewarded. Why? Because problems create headaches for people, and those who can solve such problems will gain the gratefulness of those impacted. If we are good at solving other people's problems, we will gain influence. In Genesis, we find the story of Joseph, a nobody, a slave, and a prisoner in Egypt, until Pharaoh had a major problem that nobody else could solve. When Joseph could provide the solution, he was highly promoted to be the prime minister. You see, have you ever looked at it this way? God created a problem in order to create an opportunity for Joseph. And Joseph courageously navigated through the problem with God's help to find the solution. This unlocked Joseph from slavery and locked him into Pharaoh's heart. This is why we should become adept at solving problems, for then we will unlock the opportunity that has been hidden in disguise. Let me go on to the third key for us today. Problems grow us. You see, problems will challenge us to be more resilient, more positive. Problems force us to get bigger than the problems. Our creativity, competence, and convictions have to grow to face the problem. In the world of tennis, Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, and Rafael Nadal continually face the problem of trying to better the best amongst themselves. It forced them to become far better. As the result, they became the greatest tennis players ever in this era. Think about this. Would you go about in search for more problems? Would you want that? To say, I want more problems. Yes, when you realize that the problems also help us gain experience to solve other problems, if we approach it strategically. I used to work for CSIRO, the largest scientific organization in Australia and the entire Southern Hemisphere. And as a scientist, we were often called in to solve technological problems in industry. And the thing is, when the things we learn while we solve one problem, we often can begin to apply to solve other similar problems. And some brilliant scientists, they intentionally identified industrial problems that need to be solved, but in such a way that it would systematically advance the knowledge until they built up such a comprehensive and immense knowledge that nobody else would have. Then everybody would naturally go to them for the solutions. So that is why they would search for more problems. Have you ever considered how you might grow through your problems? Now, the fourth thing I want to mention is this: problems can give glory to God. When God solves the impossible problem with the impossible solution, He gets all the glory. Remember when Moses and the Israelites were trying to escape from Pharaoh and his mighty Egyptian army? They were stuck at the shores of the Red Sea. There was no way to escape until God parted the Red Sea for them to cross. God saved them and destroyed the Egyptian army in one fell swoop. An impossible solution to solve the impossible situation. That is why we need to run to God to find the God solution. Let me now just suggest some tips for solving problems. Firstly, be humble, as arrogance will ensure we will not find the best solutions. You see, pride tends to cause us to focus on solutions that make us look good, and therefore we might well miss the best solutions. Secondly, get as much of the right people involved, especially the experts. You see, experts usually understand the factors involved in the problems better than most others. They often are familiar with a much wider range of possible solutions and its effectiveness. Get as much of the right information as possible. In computer science, there is a popular saying, garbage in, garbage out. You see, even with experts, if they are given poor or incorrect information, they will not produce the right solution. Often, it is the experts whom we need to listen to because they can inform us what kind of information they need and in what manner. Get the right people and the right information together to find the solutions. And this may actually be much harder to achieve than many people think, because too often the non-experts are at the coalface. They're the ones gathering the information, and they usually do not appreciate the value of the right information. So often the information is not collected or passed on properly. We of course need to also recognize that different experts may need different types of information, and sometimes we just pour all the information, but this may not be what they need. Another aspect we got to do is to foster faith, a can-do attitude. The team you have must believe that the problem can be solved, especially with God. This can-do attitude will foster a greater determination, resilience on their part, and even creativity. Another thing we got to keep in mind is to keep cool and discipline our minds to objectively tackle the problems. Things do happen that can stress the team, such as even disagreements, and it's crucial to focus on tackling the problem rather than focus on personalities and preferences. Another key aspect we got to do is learn to hear all sides of the problem as well as the possible solutions before you reaching a conclusion. You see, every solution has a cost and an impact which needs to be weighed up carefully. Once you've listened to all of them, you can better decide what cost you're willing to bear and the impact of that solution. Lastly, don't be hasty, but prayerfully look to God for His guidance and His help. Let me just conclude. The problems we may be confronted with are not necessarily the biggest problem. It may well be ourselves. So it's crucial to get the right attitudes towards the problem first. With the right attitudes, we can approach the problems without fear, but with faith and creativity. We may also be able to discover new opportunities that the problems present. So let me close with another story. Many years ago, cotton was once the king of crops in the southern part of the United States of America. But the boll weevil pest migrated from Mexico to the USA, and it devastated the cotton crops. Farmers in the town of Enterprise, Alabama, they were forced to diversify into soy, corn, peanuts. Some learned how to raise pigs, cattle, and chicken. But the thing is this diversification caused the farmers to become more prosperous. And so what happened? The people of Enterprise, Alabama were so grateful. They erected a statue to the boll weevil in 1919. Isn't that incredible? The problem became a wonderful opportunity to prosper because they didn't allow the problem to become the problem. God bless you.